Hi everyone, I'm Julius, and today let's talk about relabeling, a core feature in Prometheus. Relabeling allows you to plug into the different data flows in the Prometheus server, where it processes labeled objects like targets, metric samples, or alerts to either change their labels or to filter away those objects completely. In this video, I'll tell you about the motivation for relabeling, how relabeling rules work, and then give you some real-world examples. I'll also show you a cool way to visualize and debug your relabeling rules when they get complex. All right, let's go. Let's first talk about the motivation for relabeling. If you take a look at the architecture of Prometheus, you will see that the server processes several different types of objects that all have labels attached to them. First, when Prometheus discovers targets using one of its service discovery integrations, each target that comes back from the discovery will have a set of identifying and informational labels attached to it. Secondly, when Prometheus scrapes metrics from a target, the resulting time series samples will also have labels attached to them. And the same is true for any alerts that are generated from the collected data that are then sent to the alert manager. And finally, you can also configure Prometheus to forward collected samples to a remote endpoint, like a long-term storage system. And those samples will again have labels on them. Now, wouldn't it be handy if you could somehow plug into each of those flows to influence and control the processing of the labeled objects? For example, to add or remove a label, filter some of the objects away, or to change the scrape behavior in the case of a target? This is where relabeling comes in. Rather than introducing many specific configuration options for these different use cases, Prometheus gives you a generic way of manipulating labeled objects using a set of relabeling rules that you can apply to any of these flows in the Prometheus configuration file, and it's flexible enough for many different use cases. Let's have a look at how relabeling fits into the overall config file before we look at it in more detail. Here's a Prometheus configuration that sets up all the flows from the previous diagram in a minimal way. It has a single static scrape config with a single target, and it's also set up to send alerts to an alert manager instance and to forward all its samples to a remote endpoint. Now we can add a list of relabeling rules to all flows I mentioned earlier. For relabeling targets, we can add a relabel configs option to any scrape config section, and those rules will apply to all discovered targets in that section. If we want to relabel individual metric samples coming from a scrape before storing them, we can add a metric relabel config section. To relabel alerts, the option is called alert relabel configs, and it goes into the alerting section. And for remote write, we add a write relabel configs option. Any of these options defines a list of relabeling rules that each labeled object has to go through in sequence. A single rule can fundamentally do one of two things. It can either change the labels of the object and pass it on to the next rule in the list, or it can decide to drop or filter away the object. When a rule drops an object, no further processing takes place for it, and it is removed from the final result set. So, for example, if you filter away a target, that means that the target won't be scraped, or for a sample scraped from a target, the sample will not be stored in the TSDB. And hey, if you've made it this far and you want to see more Prometheus content in the future, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. It really helps these videos to get shown to more people. Thanks a lot. All right, let's have a look at the structure of a single relabeling rule. Each rule has an action field that determines the kind of action you want to perform. For example, replacing a label or dropping an object if it matches a certain pattern. And then there's all kinds of other fields that you can set on the rule depending on the type of action that you chose. For example, a list of source labels that you want to match a regular expression against, the regular expression itself, or a target label to set to a given value. I won't go into all possible action types here, but here's a list showing all of them. If you want to learn about all actions in detail and see some example use cases for each of them, check out my free relabeling training, which I'll also link in the video description. For this video, I'll just look at 4 example use cases and I'll explain the relabeling rules for those as we go along. But before we start, here's one more thing you need to know about target relabeling specifically. Raw targets that come from the service discovery will have a set of metadata labels attached to them that start with a double underscore. These double underscored labels are removed from the target after relabeling, but we can use them during relabeling to make decisions about the target or to move some of them into permanent target labels without the underscores. Those meta labels fall into two categories. The first category tells you how a target will be scraped, like the scrape address and HTTP scheme, and we can actually manipulate these special labels during relabeling to change the scrape behavior for the target. The second group of meta labels is more informational and depends on the service discovery mechanism you're using. For example, the Kubernetes pod service discovery will give you a meta Kubernetes pod name label to tell you the name of the discovered pod, as well as a meta Kubernetes pod ready label that tells you whether the pod is ready or not. And you can use these labels as an input during relabeling to either decide what to do with the target or to map some of the information into permanent target labels. You can also find the entire list of labels for each service discovery mechanism in the Prometheus documentation. All right, let's get to the examples. To illustrate relabeling rules, I will use a free web-based relabeling visualizer that I built and that you can use as well at relabeler.promlabs.com. So this tool allows you to enter a list of relabeling rules along with the labels of an example object, and then it shows you step by step how the rules would affect that object, including the label changes or the object being filtered away. As a first example, we might want to add a fixed label to all discovered targets. For example, to indicate that they represent targets in a development environment. We can achieve this with a replace relabeling action and setting the replacement field to the desired label value and the target label field to the label name that we want to set or override. Now, all targets from the relevant scrape configuration will have an env equals dev label attached to them. As a second example, we might want to override the port that a target is scraped on and always set it to 80. During target relabeling, the double underscored address meta label will contain the host and port of the discovered target separated by a colon. And if we manipulate the special meta label, we can actually change the scrape behavior of the target. So we can use a replace action again and set the source labels list to the double underscored address label. And then we add a regular expression in the regex field that is matched against that source label and extract just the hostname part from it using a regex capture group. In the replacement field, we can then refer to that first capture group using a $1 variable and then add our custom port at the end. Finally, we override the original address label with this new value by providing it as the target label to set as well. Now Prometheus will always scrape this target on port 80. For example number 3, let's have a look at the label map action that allows you to map over a whole pattern of labels at once. When you discover service endpoints as targets on Kubernetes, you may want the final target labels to also contain the labels of the Kubernetes service that the endpoint belongs to. The Kubernetes service discovery provides these service labels in a set of labels with a prefix meta Kubernetes service label and then the actual name of the service label. We can use the label map relabeling action and a regex to match the naming pattern and then just extract the label name part of those metadata labels using a capture group. And then we map the corresponding label values over to a new set of permanent labels, starting with the Kubernetes service label prefix that we supply in the replacement field. Now, all discovered endpoint targets will have Kubernetes service labels attached to them. As a fourth and final example, let's look at filtering metrics during a scrape. Sometimes you may only want to store a subset of the metrics that a target exposes because not all of its metrics are interesting to you, or storing all of them would be too expensive. We can use a metric relabeling rule with a keep action and appropriate source labels and regex fields to only keep metrics where the metric name starts with a prefix API underscore or HTTP underscore and throw away all the other series coming from the target. All right, these were some simple relabeling examples, but you can also chain together many of these rules to achieve more complex results. If your relabeling rule sets get too complicated and you need to visualize or debug them, here's 2 tips I can give you. First, you can of course use the visualizer at relabeler.promlabs.com that I've been using in this video to analyze in detail how a relabeling rule would affect a labeled object step by step. And secondly, for target relabeling specifically, you can either hover over the labels of a target in the targets page in Prometheus to see the raw labels that it had before relabeling, or if the target was unintentionally filtered away so it doesn't even appear on the targets page, you can see the raw list of discovered targets along with their pre-relabeling labels on the service discovery page of Prometheus. And that can help you track down what's going on. Alright, that's it for the basics of relabeling. Thanks for watching this video, and check out my Prometheus courses at training.promlabs.com if you want to dig deeper into all Prometheus fundamentals from the ground up. Please also leave me a like and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more in the future. See you soon.